such a powerful force. The bombers split into two groups, hitting Rochester and airfields at Eastchurch and Hawking. Later in the day, the fighter bombers of Airpro 210 went into action once more. Their intention was to bomb and strafe Kenley, a vitally important sector station. However, the raiders instead hit nearby Croydon. The next raid by 24 Dornier 17s was supposed to be on Biggin Hill, but once more, a navigational error saved a sector station. The raiders hit West Malling, an ordinary fighter airfield, which was not yet fully operational. To the west, another raid, this time of 60 Junkers 88s, escorted by 40 110s, was intercepted in turn by elements of 3 British squadrons, but broke through to hit the sector station at Middle Wallop and airfields at Odiham and Worthy Down, causing some damage. Next came a Stuka attack on Portland. 30 dive bombers, escorted by 109s and 110s. The raiders were intercepted by 18 British fighters from 3 squadrons. August the 15th would prove to be the most hard-fought day of the Battle of Britain. 14 British squadrons saw action. Some of them scrambled several times, and in all, the RAF flew almost 1,000 fighter sorties. Air Chief Marshal Sir Hugh Dowding's policy of going for enemy bombers while trying to avoid fighter-to-fighter engagements paid off handsomely. 71 German aircraft were shot down for the loss of 31 British fighters. On 2 of the following 3 days, the Germans maintained the awesome power of their offensive. The radar stations at Ventnor and Poling were badly damaged. Airfield after airfield was attacked, including sector stations at Kenley, Tangmere, and Biggin Hill. Another 100 German aircraft were destroyed for 53 British. In the weeks since Eagle Day, the German air fleets in the west had written off 284 aircraft, 10% of their strength. The slow and unwieldy Stukas had suffered particularly horrific losses, 30 destroyed or badly damaged in one day alone. Even more serious for the Luftwaffe, the vaunted Messerschmitt 110 destroyer, the only long-range German fighter, had shown itself incapable of taking on the Spitfire or the Hurricane. 79 110s had been destroyed in a week. It was a particularly hard blow to the air fleets. Now, the bombers would have to depend exclusively on the 109 for protection, and with no suitable drop tanks available, the endurance of the 109 over Britain was hardly more than 20 minutes. On August the 19th, Hermann Goering announced radical changes to his battle plan. First, the Stukas were to be withdrawn. The 3rd Air Fleet was to concentrate on night bombing, and its 109s were to be transferred to the 2nd Air Fleet, closer to the main area of operations. Attacks were to concentrate on enemy airfields in southeast England, instead of ranging over the whole southern coastal area. In one of the greatest errors of the campaign, Goering also insisted that no more effort was to be expended on radar stations, since they were proving too difficult to destroy. Fighter tactics were also to change. Responding to bitter criticism of the fighter arm from his bomber pilots, Goering ordered the 109s to stick close to the bombers. The fighter leaders were horrified. They would be throwing away the advantage of height and the priceless ability to attack out of the sun. To make matters worse, because they would have to zigzag to keep station with the slower bombers, they would waste already precious fuel. Goering also ordered that the ratio of fighters to bombers be increased. For every bomber, there would be 3 fighters. As a result, the number of missions would have to be curtailed. There simply weren't enough 109s to escort all the available bombers. From the 19th to the 23rd of August, cloudy weather restricted daytime operations by the Luftwaffe to small-scale hit-and-run attacks. Meantime, night raids were intensified with the bombing of Liverpool, Sheffield, Derby, Coventry, and Hull. The aim was to cripple the industries on which Britain's fighter strength depended, but although there were many civilian casualties, aircraft production was hardly affected. It was on the 24th that major daylight operations began once more. With them commenced a period of crisis for RAF Fighter Command. The main targets of the new Luftwaffe tactics were the airfields of 11 Group, particularly the 7 sector stations. The first to be hit in this new phase of the battle was North Weald, which was badly damaged on the 24th. Hornchurch was hit the same day. On the 26th, Debden was bombed. On the 30th, Biggin Hill was struck twice, and the next day, Debden and Hornchurch were hit and Biggin Hill bombed once again. When the main targets were defended by British fighters, lesser airfields were hit instead, including Manston, Eastchurch, Lymm and Rochford. On the 31st, Detling, Croydon, Biggin Hill, Debden and Eastchurch were attacked. Hornchurch was hit twice. The first week of September saw no let-up in the fury of the German assault. Day after day, the same airfields were bombed and strafed until many, including several key sector stations, were barely able to function. In believing that the RAF could be forced to defend its inner airfields, Hermann Goering was being proved correct. The massive German fighter escorts were making it extremely difficult for the defenders to penetrate to the bomber formations, and often single squadrons would face 30 enemy bombers and an escort 100 strong. As British casualties grew, many squadrons had been reduced to a handful of experienced men, while the training of new flyers had been cut until many had only 9 hours in modern fighters. While many British fighter pilots were privately losing the belief that the RAF would survive the onslaught, ironically, amongst their German enemies, confidence was also steadily draining away. The last month had seen losses of aircraft running at 18%, and many bombers had returned badly shot up, and with wounded crewmen. In August alone, Luftwaffe aircrew losses were 229 killed or captured, 80 wounded, and 264 missing. While RAF Fighter Command struggled for its existence in the face of relentless German pressure, a bitter dispute broke out between senior officers about Dowding's handling of the battle. The commander of 12 Group, Trafford Lee Mallory, supported by one of the RAF's most celebrated squadron commanders, Douglas Bader, insisted that tactics must be changed. Huge formations, called big wings, made up of 3 or even more squadrons, should be assembled to meet the Germans in force. In the opposing camp, 11 Group's commander, Keith Park, firmly supported Dowding and insisted that his policy was the right one. The RAF would survive only by committing its forces with the greatest caution. The arguments grew so fierce that cooperation between 12 and 11 Groups was seriously disrupted, and Lee Mallory took his campaign to have Dowding replaced all the way to Winston Churchill. The feuding within Fighter Command was taking place at the period of greatest strain for 11 Group and for Dowding himself. After a fortnight of concerted attacks on 11 Group's airfields, as landlines were severed and operations rooms destroyed, fighter control was becoming ragged and uncoordinated. Aircraft losses were now overtaking production, and the toll of pilots killed was so great that the system of rotating squadrons from hard-pressed to quiet sectors was breaking down. Fresh, frontline squadrons were taking casualties so quickly that no rested units were available to take their place. RAF Fighter Command was on the brink of total collapse. While Fighter Command was struggling to survive the Luftwaffe's onslaught, Bomber Command had been restricted to raids on Germany's industries. However, on August the 24th, German bombs had been accidentally dropped on a London suburb, and the RAF was ordered to retaliate by attacking Berlin. British bombers made 5 minor raids on the German capital in 11 days. They did little real damage, but Adolf Hitler was incensed. On September the 4th, he made a furious speech calling the RAF night gangsters and vowing revenge.
Wir werden ihre Städte ausradieren. Wir werden diesen nachgeratenen handwerksfähigen vom Arsch verhelfen.
Hitler insisted that the Luftwaffe reply at once to the British raids on his capital by bombing London. On Saturday, September the 7th, Hermann Göring and Albert Kesselring stood together on the cliffs at Cap Gris-Nez in Normandy to watch a massive formation assemble for the Luftwaffe's first great daylight attack on London. The first wave of German aircraft was detected by British radar at 1600 hours. In all, there were more than 300 bombers and 600 fighters. In the belief that the target was again the sector stations, 21 British squadrons were scrambled. It soon became apparent that the target was London, and too late, the fighters were redirected to intercept. The main targets of the massed bombers were the London docks and the city's East End. Warehouses crammed with rubber,